All right, welcome everybody. This is the fourth check-in call for the Mandel upgrade. It's March the 2nd. So far, I've only added one new item to the agenda since our last call. This was brought up by the guys from Node 1. A suggestion, perhaps it's time that we have our own developer portal. This might fit in with the assembled developer and node operator resources work that's ongoing. Maybe it's something else.
So we just to confirm, I believe last week when we met, it wasn't complete yet, but we did sign essentially a contract with OCI. I see that a few of them are online, and they will be working on API transaction lifecycles and adding that into Mandel 3.1. So that is now confirmed, and the ball is rolling. I believe we've got Brian on the line, and I did also get confirmation from Dan that his team is bypassing 2.3, so they're no longer going to 2.3 approach, and they've already started working on 3.1, including the diffuse component. So essentially, we've got confirmation, we're good. That's where we're heading. And the ENF also just secured 3 developers that'll be able to help out on our end if there's anything. They should be starting roughly beginning of April. If there's anything, I guess, prior to now, that the roadmap would be closer to end of June for this release. So we'd have internal resources to be able to put on this as well, if need be.
End of June is the final when we'd have that, or is that the...
Well, the reason why I'm mentioning end of June more so is API transaction lifecycles. The idea was that it would be a 15 to 16 week roadmap, which aligns for roughly end of June.
Yeah. Now,
it's possible that we'll get releases prior to that, and then we'll do the back and forth. But give or take now, instead of having, let's say, mid-May, it would be mid-June to end of June. But in this case, as I've mentioned in the other calls, there's no more need to do the hard fork component or the consensus upgrade component, because now we'd have the API transaction lifecycles, which would be a feature that is found in our repo that's not found, let's say, the block 1 repo. And that's a soft fork type of change. And so if that inherently is enabled, or it's a function that is present in the release that we're, let's say, using, then inevitably it means we're not on the block 1 repo. So that means the consensus upgrade side of things could occur later on. It wouldn't need to occur early at the onset. So everybody would be able to upgrade from 2.1 or 2.0 to 3.1 or whatever, however we do that, whether they go through 3.0 first. That's kind of separate. But once we'd be there, we wouldn't necessarily need to turn on functions that require consensus upgrade. Right. And we could still be separate from the block 1 repo.
So we achieve the signal of letting the world know we're on our independent,
that we're running on our own. Yes.
Just by having the block producers upgrade to it. Is that right? Without activating any of the features?
By having any block producer that essentially, or any API node that can signal that it has that function enabled, sure.
Did you say that we would get release candidate 1 at the end of June, or we'd get final? And if we're getting final at end of June, when do we get release candidate 1 of 3.1?
Well, Brian is on the call, so maybe he can chime in a little bit more. The idea would be that we would have something, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, we would likely have release candidates prior to the end of June. Again, we're 3 or 4 months in advance, so it's kind of hard to say, but the give or take estimate for that API transaction lifecycle improvement would be sometime in June. Whether or not there's back and forth, how much back and forth, how many bugs, that we can't predict. Give or take June would be when we would have something. And then how long do we then need afterwards? It'll depend on what we get and how much testing, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the plan was, we planned a month, with, the estimate was, 2 weeks of effort over a month for back and forth, but, it'll just kind of depend on how that works out. But that was the estimate.
So at this point, 4 months beforehand, I think once we get closer to that date, we'll have a better estimate. But at this point, 4 months beforehand, saying mid to late June, I think is as accurate as we'll get right now.
And that's for release candidate 1, right?
That's what I was thinking for. Just wanted to make sure that that's what you were intending. Not to have us, that the window for changes and then the final release will be a month or within a month after that?
Sure, give or take. Again,
Okay.
it depends what I've seen before that Release Canada 1 comes out and then we go to final very shortly afterward because that happens. I've also seen 3 or 4 release candidates.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. The Release Candidate 1 would be end of June, and then the projected month-long back and forth would be after that for the before the final.
So 3.1 for everyone. That's final. It's set. Release candidates coming mid to late June. The final release will be about a month later, and then consensus upgrade can happen later. Do we want to talk about that now? Whether do we start planning?
Theoretically,
for that
consensus upgrade can happen now. I mean, the thing is, those consensus upgrade features or functions currently are there, and we've had no reason to turn them on. If I'm not mistaken, like they've been there since 2.1 and some of them since 2.0. We still have functions in 1.8 that we never turned on because they're useless, or because the market has deemed that they're useless, or the developers has deemed that they're useless. The idea with the consensus upgrade was to practice and to use that as a means to re-grease the wheels and to get back into shape for what happens when we do need to go through a consensus upgrade. So that we could plan for. That's an arbitrary date. We could say fall again. We could say September. That there's no particularly need for them unless things change and developers do say, actually, there's a function that we now need, or a business comes about, for example, Fractally says we need this particular function for our application.
So I would say let's park the consensus for now and, focus on upgrading, and then we'll see how we're feeling about upgrading the consensus once we update.
And if anybody else has a different viewpoint, go for it. That's just my understanding from speaking to a lot of the stakeholders, developers in particular.
That's quite correct. The only issue that 2.1 features are not compatible with Mandel features, but we don't have them anyway in the network. So we activate them on demand as soon as we need them.
So specifically, Mandel 3.0 has 4 different protocol features. 2 of those are taken directly from 2.1 and are compatible with 2.1. The other 2 are either different or new and are incompatible with 2.1.
The 2 that you mentioned that aren't compatible and that are new, can you elaborate on those? And I guess, do you need them? Is that something that, for example, for Fractally you would need, and so that would accelerate the time that you would prefer having the consensus upgrade happen?
So the one that is probably most significant is the configurable WASM limits, which exists in 2.1, but is different because we decided to roll a few bug fixes into the 3.0 version.
And is that needed, or because we haven't turned it on right now, so it exists in 2.1 differently, we haven't turned it on. Are you saying that with these new bug fixes now it is more pressing to turn it on?
As far as I know, none of the hard forks are strictly needed. It just makes things easier.
So I'll ask it, I guess, a different way. On a scale of 1 to 10, how pressing is it to turn on those features in your opinion? I won't hold you to it. I'm just trying to get a sense of how important are these? Because other than you, I guess nobody else has asked for these features. So, but if it is important for you, then we should know so that we can work towards that.
It might be important for EVM. I mean, if we want to deploy the large contracts like EVM.
So the configurable WASM limits, a lot of people do run into the limits because they're set too tightly currently. It's just that it's basically it's annoying, but you can work around it.
I'll ask a different way. Do you want us to turn them on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. Do you want us to turn them on earlier rather than later? For example, at the end of the summer or fall?
I tend to be fairly conservative, so I would say I would probably later, probably towards fall rather than summer. But
if we work towards deployment, testing, and the majority of the block producers upgrading to 3.1, end of June, July, that time frame, let's say August, so it takes a while before everybody's there. Typically, the block producers will do it in waves. They'll coordinate to make sure that 1 or 2 are using the latest 3.1, like Matthew from EOS Nation will typically be the first one. And then it'll go on purpose. This is the idea until everybody's done. We see that historically it's about a 2-month process, give or take. That would bring us, let's say conservatively, to the end of August. End of August, everybody's running 3.1, or give or take, everybody's running 3.1 at the block producer level. Then we could, that process would be obviously public. Everybody knows what's going on. We could still aim towards, I mean, now would be 6 or 7 months early. We could aim towards saying, let's turn on, for example, that wasn't configurable, wasn't a limit function in September. And that would be, I mean, we could even say September 23rd, which would be a symbolic date from when we did the last hard fork. I mean, that gives us 6 months to work towards something. And I'm not necessarily sticking to that date, but that would give us half a year heads up working towards something. Would that seem reasonable for you, Stephen, on your end? And anybody else on the call? Like, does anybody?
In my mind, the biggest concern there is just making sure everybody is aware before you turn on a feature that forks out 2.0.
Of course.
EOSIO. Just so everyone's aware, and prepared for when that happens, because you enable that particular protocol feature or either one of those two that's not compatible, or even one of the 2.1 protocol features. Anyone still running 2.0 of EOSIO
will be forked out.
So we just need to make sure that the community is ready for it, right? And they're not surprised.
So that's why we're having these weekly calls. Originally, the idea was to do, let's say, that consensus upgrade mid-May. And so now we've delayed that by a few months, but we're still having these calls. We're still talking about it right now. We've already started talking about that process. From my point of view, I believe that 6 months is plenty of time if we keep the pace that we're going, we keep having the people involved for the wider ecosystem to know of, for example, September 23rd.
Yeah.
So I would not be worried about that part.
Right.
At this point right now.
Ahead of time, right? I mean, you should be able to hit all the BPs with a get info and see, oh, yep, everyone's upgraded, we're good to go. And if not, reach out to given BP and say, hey, you guys need to get on board here.
Well, the process has effectively already started, right? So this is what we're already doing. So to me, that sounds extremely conservative. I really don't see why we wouldn't be able to hit that date, seeing as that we're 6 months ahead of time and already having these weekly calls and already communicating this information.
One thing to keep in mind when trying to check and confirm block producer nodes, it's always hidden behind the scenes. So what the API returns isn't always what somebody behind the scene is. So I know we're all kind of aware of that, but just to clarify, we've gotten caught on that before, and there's one or two little stragglers, but it's hard to know what the VP is actually running.
So we've got a pretty good plan there that we did the same thing for the 1.8 upgrade. On the agenda for today, we'll be checking in on our progress. We're assembling all of the developer resources. Nice little package for all of the exchanges and developers on, hey, here are the impacts. Here's what's coming. And here's when you got to be upgraded by. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. We're putting together a survey as well so that they can respond and let us know, first of all, that they can acknowledge they've received it and give us input on whether they're running a node that would be impacted. And we're also in the process of this, and actually I think we've almost completed this. We've got a database. We've been working with the EOS support team, and we've got an intern on the EOS Nation team who's been creating a database of all of the EOS dApps and all of the exchanges. And we've got a contact for each of them. And we're going to be, sending out all of these resources and getting them to fill out those surveys. So we'll make sure everyone is well aware that this is coming and that we have a good sense of the status.
When we've been having the discussions as well with Jungle, for example, and Kylene. So like the whole process now is already under works. So if we're going to be doing the consensus upgrade, let's say September 23rd, and that would have that configurable WASM limits, and WASM doesn't have the second A, it's just WSA.
I was wondering, I had a feeling that might have been the case, but
this would make sense to, if we have other functions, to turn them all at the same time, so we don't do multiple. Which is the other one, the get hash one, Stephen, or is it a separate one?
Yes, the other new one is the get code hash.
Okay, so I would imagine let's turn that one on as well at the same time.
Yes. Then the ones from 2.1 are the action return value and configuration, additional, and a separate hard fork for configuring that.
And are those people on the call, are those functions also functions that we wish to turn on? So sometimes, again, like I said, we've chosen not to turn on functions because they're not needed and or nobody's asking for them, and or it can cause issues if we do turn them on and we don't maintain them, or we don't just turn on functions to turn on functions. Do you, in your opinion, should we turn on those functions? And Stan, I guess you're unmuting yourself to.
Yeah, the code hash is important for contract security, because you as a contract author or contract maintainer, you can certify other smart contracts that you're working against smart contracts that you know, because you certify their hashes. Because right now you send your inline actions to other contracts, you don't know what's going on the other side.
And that one is useful for Audit Plus as well and Recover Plus.
Yeah,
so they both ask for that.
All kinds of DeFi where you depend on third-party components.
So you can confirm that the contract you're interacting with hasn't changed. Is that the idea?
Absolutely, yeah. You just basically stop sending there any transactions if it doesn't comply with what you know about it.
What about the two other functions? And maybe you want to write them down, Daniel.
Yeah, what there was
the return value from action.
Variable.
Return value from actions. I don't know how important it is. Some people want this because it just improves the functionality that you can use on a blockchain. So,
and then there was another MSIG required to configure this one.
This is blockchain parameters. It allows another way to configure all of the consensus parameters, including the new one added from the return value. So I think that should be enabled if and only if the return value is also enabled.
Okay. Gotcha. So I'll ask it a different way. Is there anybody opposed to turning on, let's assume, the 4 functions?
So the return value is also useful for the new feature that's going in with the API changes. You have a read-only transaction. And so one of the ways to get the data out from that read-only transaction is via a return value. It's a very easy way, as opposed to like console output, which is kind of the hack that people have used before for getting the information out, or put it in an assert message, which is even more of a kind of a hack. So it's just a nicer way. So that certainly would have my vote for whatever that's worth.
So is there anybody who's opposed to turning on those functions? And we can ask again we can ask every week for a while.
And then for the other two, the WASM configuration and a blockchain configuration, those are very useful. I think they ought to be turned on. Everyone needs to know that they need to be very cautious with those. Like you would never want to ever change any of those values without first doing it on a test change, because you can brick the chain if you screw up the values. You can shoot yourself in the foot with those if you do it wrong.
So what we updated the system contract to support a set of hard-coded configurations that we think are safe.
Should I put a warning here? Who is that configuring WASM limits is the dangerous
So
one?
you can set the parameters high enough that it's possible to execute transactions that are too big, that no one can reasonably execute.
Yeah, well, you can even do worse. Like you can set them so low that you can't ever fix it.
No, that is forbidden.
Well, for all of them?
So the minimum parameters are set in such a way that it's always possible to do a set code of a contract that can fix the parameters.
Okay, and that's true of the blockchain parameters as well?
Blockchain parameters are different. That doesn't allow configuration of anything that isn't already configurable. It's just a new interface for doing it.
Right, except for the return value.
Which is not going to break anything.
Yeah, well, it's harmless. Okay, cool.
September 23rd, let's call that a soft target. We can revisit all this as we go. For now, we know upgrading the BPs for August is the current priority. All right, let's continue.
I would just say, sounds like we should make sure we do lots of testing for that. Based on what I just heard. So maybe put a note for that.
Yeah, I've put a warning here that this could brick the chain.
Yeah. So we did make system contract changes. Unless someone that support the configurable WASM limits, someone would have to update the parameters that are hard-coded there in order to break it.
Yeah, but there's many system contracts in play, right? I mean, there's wax, there's tell-offs, there's a number of different chains that won't necessarily have that particular system contract.
Agreed.
Okay. Anything to add to that one? Do we want to? So it sounds like we may be closer to do we want to call, like, set a date that we want to target for any of this stuff, or continue monitoring? We're pretty far out for now. But I think we said August is when we want to,
Well, because it's just a regular update. Essentially, it's whenever it's ready and the block producers start doing it one by one.
Right.
And
we're no longer,
date.
There's no impact to any exchanges or dApps or anything like that with,
that
it's only when we get to the activation of the consensus upgrade.
Correct. Which then we work towards, let's say that's September 23rd.
Right. Okay. I'm going to just leave that for now. Next up, test Mandel on Jungle 4. I don't know if there's much to discuss besides, I see that block producers have begun registering. Thank you. I know that our team hasn't registered yet. We should be registered before the next call, but I would just say we're on track. We've got already a good number who have joined. And once we've got enough, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on what is enough before we want to actually move ahead and upgrade. I don't think we're there yet. Maybe we'll just revisit on the next call, see where we're at.
I think it's also important to note in the communication that because we're changing the tentative date was, let's say, May 19th, and now we've, let's say, moved it to September 23rd as a draft. That is essentially 4 months later, but the difference in what you get by then is significant compared to what we were getting, let's say, on May 19th. And May 19th was just for the current functions, essentially with that twist with the WASM limits. But what we get slightly later is much more upgraded. And then what we get 4 months later, let's say that's September 23rd, is significantly different than what we were getting in May.
Right.
And anyway, the May deadline, the original date of May was very aggressive and not particularly realistic to begin with.
But it'll be important to communicate that, because if not, then the impression could be that we're delaying, where it's not apples for apples. What's going to happen in September is significantly different than what was originally on the plate for May.
And is that an impact on testing? I guess we're going to have more testing, to do than what we originally were scoping out to do, since there's new features that we're not as familiar with.
No, I wouldn't say that to be the case.
Okay. So I've updated. So we've got our one path now. So I've removed nothing changes here now that we've set on our 3.1 for all path.
Perhaps it changes. Actually, Stephen might be able to answer. Do you have a timeline, Stephen, for 3.1 when that should be, let's say, release candidate of 3.1?
So that will depend on exactly what is going into 3.1 from my side, which I'm not entirely certain of at this point.
So we did talk about last week, and I think Stan started inputting issues in the GitHub, fixes that are currently found in 2.1.x on the block 1 repo. And
okay,
I think it was Kevin that was bringing that up. So if we put those in, then that might change the timeline for the 3.1 portion. Fixes that are currently addressing challenges, I think might see Michael praying. Fixes that are currently fixed right now, but that weren't in the 3.0 release candidate, but that are out, that are tested, that essentially would just put in the 3.1. They're already written out. They're already even been tested and or live.
Okay, so after last week, I created a PR that merges all the changes into 2.0.x.
Okay.
branch.
That will go into 3. Which one? Will that go in 3.0 or 3.1?
Yeah, it sounds like maybe there's an opportunity here. So originally we had planned to upgrade from 2.0 to 3.0, mainly just because of time. We were, up against that tight May target, and we didn't want to waste time waiting for 3.1. We wanted to start testing the features. Now that we've got, some more time, maybe it's worth skipping the upgrade to 3.0 and waiting for 3.1 to be ready, and just upgrading straight from 2.0 to 3.1 on Jungle.
But Steven, those updates from 2. Are they going into 3.0 or 3.1? Where do you mention?
So at the moment, there are no changes to the repo.
Well, where are they planned to be?
It can be merged to both branches with no conflicts because they're still identical.
Okay. Because they're not feature changes, right? They're just bug fixes mostly. So I think 3.0 release candidate 2 would be probably.
Okay, so there is value testing 3.0 release candidate 2. Is that right?
Well, release candidate 1, you can still go through that and or skip, I guess, the release candidate 2, depending on the timeline.
Release candidate 1 is already out. It's already in test. So yeah, those.
Well, that's why I would add a line, I guess, in between is what I'm suggesting.
Do you agree, Stan? We upgrade from 2.0 to 3.0 RC1 and then from RC1 to RC2?
Well, that's already happening. That's already happened.
Well, we haven't upgraded Jungle yet.
No, I mean, Jungle, we didn't upgrade.
Right now, Jungle's still on 2.0.
We didn't upgrade producers on the whole Jungle network.
Yeah, so we can.
I don't know if RC2 is coming out within days. It makes sense to wait for it, and also the time constraints on Crypto Alliance side because they're in the middle of a war now,
right?
So they might not be available for upgrade. So yeah, we need to give them probably more time to set up everything and accept those BP registrations and update everything. So. Yeah, but I mean, if those mergers are available, maybe let's make RC2.
Okay, and then possibly again, maybe there's an opportunity depending on capacity and how things are smoothing. Maybe we just go right to 3.1. But I'll leave this for now. Okay. Any other thing to add on this?
And remind me, it was decided that we're not doing a Mandel version that's compatible with EOSIO 2.1. Correct?
3.1 will be. So yes, but not a separate one.
Not a separate one, right?
Not a standalone one.
Originally, it was going to be 2.3 and 3.0 separately. Now, scrap 2.3. Everything's going into 3.1, fully compatible with both.
Correct. If that's what you're asking,
compatible, Kevin. Because the protocol features are not compatible. Just to be clear.
Right, but you're not planning on merging EOSIO 2.1 into that. Are you? I'm a little confused.
No.
Originally, I thought there was a plan to have a Mandel that was based off of EOSIO 2.0 and a Mandel that
so the reason for doing that is that it would be is to get the May release out as fast as possible. The only reason for creating 2.3 is that it's faster to backport a few features from 3.0 to 2.1 than it is to backport all the features we want from 2.1.
I'm sorry, I'm being dense, I guess. I'm still not clear. It's still not clear in my mind. So there's EOSIO 2.0 and 2.1. 2.1 has a number of things in it that I don't think the community needs or will ever want.
Right.
For example, transaction pruning in a new transaction format and a new block format. Are we planning on creating a Mandel that is compatible with that and that it forks off of EOSIO 2.1?
I don't think so. Basically, the key feature for in 2.1 that was requested is log rotation because many operators already use that in production. But if 3.1 implements that feature, then we're good.
Okay, so we're planning on getting the features we want by backporting them to Mandel as opposed to cutting another branch off of EOSIO. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
2.3 was always intended as a temporary stopgap.
Right, but we're not even talking about doing a temporary stopgap anymore, are we? That's my question.
Correct.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that's the direction I thought we should go in. So I'm glad to hear that that's where we've landed. Thank you.
Platform support. I don't know if we have much to. We already agreed. Ted, I know you're working on some documentation, Docker stuff. I don't think that there's any urgency for that at this time.
Yeah,
don't know if you have anything.
There's an engineer that said they would kind of do this for us, but they recently were hospitalized, and so they said they were running about a week or two behind on it. We did find some stuff that's in the old Block 1 repository, but it's not quite the Dockers, and they discontinued making Docker images available, et cetera. But all we're looking for here is the documentation on how to take a Docker image. I think another issue we should decide is, are we going to pre-build Docker images in our core set of Ubuntu 18 whatever and 20 version 2004 and 1804 and make those available along with the documentation. But the engineer I talked to is willing to just write the documentation for us. And it's again, he just is hospitalized, so he's running a little bit behind.
Okay. I think the idea based on the discussion on the last week's call was that we would provide both the documentation and the Docker's pre-created or whatever, however you guys say it. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Debian packages are always needed.
Okay.
They just need to be verified and coming from a trustful source. But everyone is installing those Debian packages. I mean, except exchanges which compile everything from sources because of security. Most users or system operators, they download Debian packages from Block1 repository now. So we need to provide this kind of.
So Stan, you're saying people don't want, so this might have been driven by developers wanting Docker images for front-end developers, and you're adding an additional requirement, Stan, saying more of the block producers would prefer Debian packaging, like a dead package that they can just run, but which group wants the Debian packages? Because you're saying the block producers.
Every system administrator who needs to install an EOS node needs Debian packages, because maybe like 5% of nodes are compiled from sources because of security concerns. Like on a block producer, you normally compile from sources. If you're an exchange, you transact. You operate with financial data. You need to compile from sources. Everywhere else, people just download the binary Debian packages.
Got it.
Install because it takes 5 minutes to install.
For clarity, Debian packages are what Ubuntu uses anyway. So we're staying within our Ubuntu classes of what machines will support. I think we're adding to Docker. We're also saying we'd like Debian packaging as well.
Okay, so Docker is different than the Debian. Okay, so
yeah,
Docker is different. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not even sure Docker is needed. I'm not sure Docker is needed because there are some.
It was asked for by other groups. We're saying the front end developers and smart contract developers were saying, I don't necessarily want to run the whole chain, or I might be on a Windows machine or on a Mac or whatever. Just give me a Docker image. I'll toss that on, and then I can work on my smart contract. So it's a different use case, Stan. So we probably, if we can, provide both, and it's also to help new people start to work in the EOSIO environment. So Virginia Tech, one of the ways they would get new students working on EOSIO was, here's a Docker container. We don't care what machine mom and dad bought you, run this thing. And that's how they kind of made it work. And then
that ties in, we're talking about dropping the Mac, right? Or future Mac support. So, those Docker images are going to be key, yes, I would think, to help support that decision.
That was a big part of it, yes.
Right. That was what we decided. Like when we agreed, hey, let's drop the Mac, as long as we can provide these Docker images. That was the feedback we got.
Yeah, and there was also people asking for it for Windows as well. There's still people using Windows apparently.
Right. Okay. So we're clear here now? Thanks for the update. Yeah. We're still, I don't know, do you have any progress to report on the dev resources you're working on, Stan?
No, I've been sick and I didn't.
No problem. All good. I gave a little update on our progress. Like I said, we've got a pretty good database of exchanges and apps, as well as contact information for them. So once we have our whatever we need, we're going to do the survey and kind of a nice package explaining everything. We can hit them all individually. I don't think there's anything new to report here. I understand Blocks is now available on Kylin. And again, thank you, Michael, for getting your Hyperion set up. That was what enabled that. And I'm not sure. I think we had identified possibly something that Rio is going to have to do in the longer term.
It's more related to just, I think, the Hyperion lifecycle updates and whatnot. But yeah, it seems to be running fine as is.
So should we consider this done or ready for testing at least? Oh, I guess it's done.
Well, there were two. There was a short term and a long term.
Okay, so let's keep it in progress. Done. The short term
is done. That's up and running. If anybody had any problems, let me know. But the overall Hyperion and history compatibility is more of a longer term.
Okay, so it's like a different thing. Okay, we'll just call this done.
It may not be best to be titled like that. Does that make sense? Kylan's run or the Explorer's running.
Right.
It's more history in general, to adapt to all the new 3.1 whatever reader codes, blah 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 blah. So I don't want to speak for Igor, but I think it was much bigger down the road. Things are running fine on current versions.
For our needs for testing on Kylan, we're set. Cool. Let's see. Anything here to discuss? No progress on the survey. I'm still coordinating with folks on Kylan. Next up will be to activate Power Up.
For the communication, Daniel, just to confirm, are you posting this call in the EOSIO developers chat?
I've not yet.
Is anybody opposed to us doing that so that even we have more people that just tune in and listen into this? That way they can voice their concerns well in advance if there are any. Or
yeah, that's a good point. Do we want to invite them to join these calls, or do we want to more show them the results of these calls and get them to provide?
Just let them know is enough.
You think so, Stan? I would be okay with them joining these calls. I mean, most people on these calls just listen in and they don't necessarily chime up unless there's anything.
Yeah, we can invite them, of course, for future.
I'm talking specifically the EOSIO dev channel because we might have applications in there or people building and.
Yep, I've been holding off.
That it got out of hands. Like if people are just going to start chiming up and.
I've been holding off on the dev communication until we have that package. Like, hey, here's everything you need to know. But I don't think there's harm in starting that, getting the ball rolling. Kind of let them know, hey, we're having these calls. If you're curious, feel free to watch the recording and our meeting summary notes and join if you like. And we'll have more details to come in our package of resources. But yeah, that's good feedback. I'll start doing that going forward. Do we want to talk about the developer portal? I don't have anything in this issue yet. It was raised as feedback that we might need one. Right now, I guess Block 1 manages the developer portal and it's pretty outdated. And I imagine once we upgrade, they're not going to be updating their resources to indicate Mandel exists or any of that stuff.
I have background that is I often get the request from the developers from the community that is there any updated resources or some samples or training resources or some localized contents there. So I was not sure is there somebody dedicated person for the documentation in ENF or some Fractally team? So I was asking you, and then if there's no people, then no person to dedicate it for the documentation, then maybe it will be the community's job, I think.
Right.
Stan, do you want to chime into that? Because it was part of Core Plus. I think it's actually out of this particular scope, but I do see the need for it, but it's not really in this particular.
Yeah, basically, we in the Core Plus, we indicated a whole set of tasks and jobs for information management, information delivery, content creation. So that is coming. Now we have paper delivery still and reviews, and then as soon as the budgets are getting allocated and we need to hire people to actually produce this content. So that is coming. That is covered. At least there is a roadmap for that.
So we're currently in the feedback cycle for the blue papers. I apologize. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, Junhunk, or that's what I'm seeing. If you would like to provide feedback on the blue papers, that specific one that I think would be what you're looking at would be the Core Plus blue paper. So if you want to participate in that feedback, or if you think there's something missing, I invite you to go through that feedback process. Once that feedback process is done is when the ENF will gather the feedback, essentially create a new community enhanced version, if applicable, if we do receive feedback, and then with the original authors, we do back and forth and they deem essentially that should go in. And then we'll start allocating work based on that feedback. And so if you think that this should be addressed, then I invite you to go participate in that process.
Okay, I see.
And that applies to everybody else on the call as well. If in the blue papers there's anything that either you think was missed and or anything that was addressed and that you really want to see, I invite you to participate in that process.
Great. So I guess, we'll consider this covered outside of scope of this, and I'll call it done. We had one other item we wanted to talk about that I think it was Kevin who brought up. Where did my security, where did my agenda go?
Yeah, so I don't think there's much really to say here. I mean, mid-March, ENF will have certainly will have the resources to handle anything that might come up. But before then, certainly feel free to reach out to me if anything would happen to happen and you need some support there. I'm happy to help.
Awesome.
So this is in the event. So what I understand you're offering is, in the event we run into any security issues through this process, you can help us.
Yes,
right? You'll be our point of contact to solve any emergency security issues.
I'm happy to help there. I'm sure Dan's team might be available as well, though. I certainly don't speak for his team, but for myself, I can speak. If you need some help, let me know.
Awesome.
It is already happening, actually. On VAX, we are in the middle of troubleshooting some potentially security concern. So it is happening already. Kevin is helping.
Okay. Do anything else we need to basically? Hey, we know Kevin's our man. If something happens, call Kevin. And everyone, I think, knows how to contact Kevin if we need him.
Yeah, we've got the Ghostbusters phone or Batman type of signal.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Kevin. I think that covers everything on the agenda. Is there anything else that's come to mind as we've been going through these?
It was one thing I missed on the Kylan faucet. There was a to-do. I don't know if the Kylan faucet's been fixed, but I got a bag of Kylan tokens. I went and claimed like 3 years worth of BPay. So I'm around and I've got like 250,000 EOS over there. So I'm rich.
All
but
right.
If anybody needs anything, at least in a stopgap, like say I shot like 10,000 EOS over to ore or something. But that may be a good stopgap and at least take some pressure. I don't know who runs that. I don't even remember who runs it.
Mainly Lao Mao and Asia.
Yeah, so I've been chatting with them, and we're turning on the faucet, activating power up. We're coordinating. That'll come hopefully soon.
And what Michael is hoping is that we turn Kylie and or Jungle into Kusama so that the tokens actually have value. And now he's sitting on fortunes.
I have doubt for it. Yeah,
but he's just offered to dish them all out to whoever needs them. So.
Hey, I spread the wealth. I just want everybody to succeed.
EOS
Lambos
USA
for all.
Has offered to be our faucet.
Yeah, just ping me in the channel.
Temporarily, anyways.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Until he runs out.
There you go. Great.
I'm producing a lot of blocks. I keep that faucet going a long time. If you need them, by all means, you can have them. That means you're doing something.
And that's really good, actually, because Kylie historically has been very decentralized, and it is kind of tricky because we don't have a potential source of a lot of tokens, whereas Jungle has been a little bit easier in that front. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Anything else? Oops. Okay. In that case, I'm happy. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you again in a week. I'll put out the recap and we'll have a video edited to share with the community probably the next day or two. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you.